How are you, sister? All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think we're at the top of the hour. And we're going to get started like we normally do. I'm going to review a little bit of what happened this morning and allow you to ask questions. Whether you are in the room or online, you can ask questions. But this morning we looked at a text for the second time. And the text was Exodus 20, verses 18 through 24. The reason we're looking at it the second time is the first time we looked at it basically as it stands in Exodus, and as it is part of the storyline in Exodus. The reason we looked at it today, again, is because it is a part of a fairly significant scene in Hebrews chapter 12. And so we actually did a couple things. I just sort of reviewed real quickly what happened in the text at Exodus 20, starting with verse 18, and that is Moses presenting, God having presented the Ten Commandments to the people. He has overwhelmed him with his presence and with the content, and they have responded, I think, naturally, reasonably, logically, but also poorly. And what they have said is that they were, well, what happened is they were in fear of everything that was before them, which included both God's presence as well as God's words. What he said within the giving of the Ten Commandments was also troubling for them, I believe, as well. And their response was fear. And the fear that they had was a fear that was really unproductive. And Moses told them, do not be afraid. They were so afraid that he not only had to sort of regather them, but he had to tell them, they told him, Moses, you speak to us, don't let God speak to us like this. We'll listen to you. If he speaks to us again like this, we'll die. And last time I sort of represented that as a good thing. In other words, they understood their humanity before God, their creator, and they also understood their sinfulness before God, the Holy One. And yet, as I mentioned today, there's something wrong with this. Moses' point was not only don't be afraid, God has not come here to destroy you, but to test you. And then secondly, but keep the fear of the Lord with you, because that will help you as you learn to live with God, and it will harness and promote holiness, reverence, and worship within them. And so fear of the Lord is not a horrible thing at all. It's a helpful thing. And we see the difference between a fear that is unproductive and terrorizing versus a fear that is holy, reverent, and worshipful. But that was a significant day, and Paul used, or I keep saying Paul, I'll say what I said this morning. I think Paul wrote Hebrews, but probably, since it's not a slam dunk, since the author remains sort of anonymous within the text, it's probably not great for me to say that. So the author of Hebrews uses this in chapter 12. And what he does is he sets up a comparison, and the image of the comparison is two mountains. And we're looking at chapter 12, verses 18 through 24. And really one mountain is talked about in verses 18 through 21. And the second mountain is talked about in verses 22 through 24. And we went into some of the review of what the background of Hebrews is. I'll be very short. That it seems that there are Christians who had a Hebrew background, so they were raised Jews but converted to Christianity, and their conversion is questionable because they're going back on it, and they want to recant and go back into Judaism because there's some problems with Christianity. Well, what could be the problem? If you look back at chapter 11, there are people being killed for their faith. And so maybe, it's hard to say, but maybe these Jews are because of these martyrdoms and because of these threats, maybe it's easier for them to be Jewish and live in the Roman Empire than it is Christian and live at the Roman Empire at this place and time. Persecutions within Rome within the Roman Empire tended to go up and down at times and across geography as a huge amount of land. So it's hard to say specifically what was going on, but they were thinking Christianity is costing too much. Let's go back to Judaism. And the author of Hebrews is saying, For this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason. The whole book is reason after reason after reason why Christ and Christianity is superior to the old covenant. You cannot go back. There is no hope. There is no help there. And so we talked about that a little bit. And then in 18 through 21, there is a description of Mount Sinai on the very day we were talking about it back in Exodus chapters 19 and 20. And so you're very familiar with 18 through 21. We've been studying that for a while now. And the point is the fear, the trembling, and the threat of judgment that is there. And verse 18 says to the Christian, you've not come to this kind of mountain. You've not come to this kind of mountain. So what kind of mountain did they come to? Verse 22 says, but you've come to Mount Zion. Okay? And so then we started talking about what is Mount Zion. It's a physical mountain, but once the prophet's finished with it, and I won't go through every prophecy or every prophet we talked about, once the prophet's finished with it, it looks like heaven. It's the consummation of the rule of God over the entire world with the people of God coming to the mountain, learning and being discipled by God. There is peace, there is security, and there is justice there. And we looked at, I'll just name a couple. We looked at Psalm 48, 1 and 2, Psalm 132, 13, Psalm 110, 1 and 2, Obadiah 16 and 17, Matthew 5, 34 through 35. The big one I think that is most clear about this is Isaiah 2, 1 through 4. And then Isaiah 66, 20 through 21 is sort of the capstone that says not only are people from other nations going to come, but God is going to use some of these people as Levites and priests. And that just would blow a Jewish person's mind at that time, obviously. And so that's what happens at Mount Zion. It's a real place physically on earth, but it becomes legendary and prophetically it lays expectations that are well beyond what you could expect out of a normal city on earth, right? And that is Mount Zion. And it's called several things: City of the Living God, Heavenly Jerusalem. I stopped at Heavenly Jerusalem to point out the significance of spiritual things that are in heaven over physical things that are on earth, and try to make sure that we understand that heavenly spiritual things are much more significant. I used a couple of examples of our bodies and of angels, that heaven is just much more significant than what happens on earth. We looked at the angels that are there. As he describes this place, he describes the inhabitants on Mount Zion. And one of them is angels that are not preparing for war. They're actually preparing for a festival or a celebration. There are people there, and the description of the people is that they are an assembly in a church of the firstborn, enrolled in heaven. Their names are enrolled as participants, as citizens of heaven. They're called the church, and we talked a little bit about what the word church means. They are the firstborn. The question really is, are these people just Christians of the New Testament kind after the life of Christ, after the giving of the Spirit, or are these faithful people from the Old Testament as well? And I think the context, I think the language that's used says that these are believers, those who are faithful to God, those who are obedient to God from all eras of the church and all eras of the Old Testament as well. Now, there's not a whole lot of believers, as there should be in the Old Testament, but any that are in this group, okay? And they're described as the righteous that are made perfect. Another person who is at this mountain, Mount Zion, is God himself, the judge of all. And I thought it was interesting that it would describe God as a judge right after it declared people righteous. He is the one who declares them righteous, and he holds no threat to everybody who's trying to celebrate, because everybody there is not a criminal, doesn't owe anything. Christ has paid it all, and because they are righteous and been declared righteous, there's no fear of a judge being in the room, right? Which is the basic difference between Zion and the terror that is at Sinai and the peace and celebration that is at Zion, right? The last person mentioned here is Jesus himself, the mediator of a new covenant, the one with the better blood, the blood that cleans, and even is better than Abel's blood. And there's a couple points I wanted to pull from that. First of all, it's pretty clear that we live in what has come to be known as the already not yet. And we already have come to this mountain, and yet we have not seen the full, complete fulfillment of these promises and of these hopes. We still have hope because we live on earth as well. So we are already there, and we are not yet there at the same time. The second point I wanted to make is the idea that one of the differences between Mount Sinai and Mount Zion is Mount Zion is telling you to come and worship the Lord. And it uses the phrase draw near over and over and over again. I think I gave at least 4, maybe 5 times where the book of Hebrews is saying draw near to God, which is just, and you do that through the mediator, Jesus Christ. You come to God through Jesus Christ. Well, if you think about that, how did Sinai want you to use the mediator of Moses back then? At Mount Sinai, the people said, Moses, get between us and God so he will leave us alone. He'll talk to you, not us. They're not drawing near, they're drawing away. And this is a problem, and it's going to continue to be a problem. One of the characteristics you're going to see as we go through Exodus is Moses always wants to continually get closer to God, and the people always want to be left alone from God. And there's something wrong with that. And in the new covenant, we have a mediator that says, through me, come to the Father. Through my work, come to the Father. And the idea is drawing near to God. And that's why Jesus is such a great mediator. And I made some application to people who have, while we're not Jews, thinking about walking away from Christianity. The church has had a lot of people walk away from it in the last few years. And, one of the questions you got to ask is the question of Hebrews: why would you go to anything else? What is there to go to? And Jews can't go back to Sinai. That's a mistake. But neither can you go somewhere else. I was talking to somebody after the service, and we both knew of a person, different people, who had been, for all intents and purposes, Christians going to church. Well, they stopped going to church, and then they stopped calling themselves Christians, and then they said, I'm not a Christian anymore, don't consider me like that, right? Well, my question is, what are you moved on to? You can't just move away from Christ. You've got to go to something else. And when you heard this person start talking about what he believes in, even as the words are coming out of his mouth, he realized how crazy he sounded. He realized it because he had heard the gospel and he understood the view, the perspective that he had abandoned. And so I think there is a word of Hebrew warnings from the book of Hebrews for us, though we are not Jews, all right, or Jewish heritage. All right, I'm going to leave it at that as far as a review. Are there any questions or helpful comments that you want to make? Yes, ma'am, Ms. G.
Answer one of my questions, that on Mount Zion, there's no condemnation, and we're all going to stand in purity before our holy God.
Yes.
So we don't have to worry about judgment.
Right.
Okay.
The judges there has declared us righteous. Mm-hmm. And Christ who is there has sprinkled us with his blood.
Yes. So
those who are there are clean and righteous.
Is there another name for Mount Zion? Could it be New Jerusalem also?
Yes. Sometimes the Jerusalem and New Jerusalem are interchangeable with Mount Zion because it's the same geographic place, but also it's talked about prophetically in some of the same ways. And both of those things refer to God's rule, his holiness that is worldwide and that's appreciated by all who are under his rule. There's safety, there's justice, there's holiness, there's righteousness under his rule there. And that's why I think John in Revelation pulls off this idea of a new Jerusalem that comes down and everything is right there. Everything is heavenly there. Right.
You mentioned Obadiah. I was just wondering what was destroyed on Mount Zion. You mentioned that Mount Zion had to be reestablished.
Right.
according to Obadiah. So what was...
Yes, so physically what happened there was Babylon came and attacked Jerusalem. You had two attacks in the region. You had Assyria come and destroy what we would call the northern kingdom and come right up to the gates of Jerusalem. And Sennacherib's army, there was a miracle. They no longer encircled Jerusalem. Several of them were dead, the rest of them were gone. And it happened overnight, and the Assyrians left. Though they conquered a lot of the other tribes in the north, right? That happens in 722 BC. In 605 down to 587, there are 3 attacks from Babylon. And the Babylonians take over everything else, not just the northern kingdom, but the southern kingdom as well. Think of people getting taken out of there like Daniel, and they get carried off into Babylon, and you have the Babylon captivity go on. Well, the reason that happens is because Jerusalem is destroyed. The best picture of this is probably Jeremiah in the book of Lamentations, where he's looking over a destroyed city, okay? So the Babylonians tore up Jerusalem. And that's what Obadiah is talking about, that Jerusalem will fall, but it will be reestablished and restored. And you know, as you know, physically, Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, those are the characters from Scripture who restore Jerusalem and the temple and the walls. That kind of.
Did that include the temple?
Yes, yes.
But then under now Zion, we don't have to worry, there's not going to be a temple because God is
yeah. When you take a look at what it is prophetically, we are worshiping, I would say, in a heavenly manner. And you know, there is a heavenly temple that is the template for the earthly temple, but really worship is at the throne of God. Really worship is face to face with Christ, and that kind of thing. Ken?
The friend or the person that you mentioned didn't come back to church or abandoned it, didn't hear the gospel. It's not possible for a genuine Christian to abandon the faith. So I guess your question would have been to him that you were never a part of the body of Christ.
Yeah, I treat him like he's an unsaved person. You know, I mean, I certainly don't believe that you can be saved by God and then lost in some way. That there is the perseverance of those who are faithful because God is the one who holds you. And I don't think you saved yourself, nor can you re-lose yourself in some way. And I think there's a lot of passages that would back that up. And so when I look at this person, I know that he's been exposed to a lot of Christianity, but that he has never been saved. And he would agree. He would agree with that. He would say, you know, I had a Christian phase, but I was never a Christian. You know, and you get people like this a lot who, you know, come and see what it's like, experience it in the sense that they expose themselves to a lot of things and are, you know, that are Christian, and then walk away. And, you know, theologically, we have to say they're unsaved. Have always been unsaved.
Do you think this pandemic sort of revealed some things about, you know, the relationships we had in the pandemic had gone and don't come back, or is that a bit tough to judge them like that?
I do. I think a lot of what keeps people in churches, their respective churches, are the relationships with people in the church. And that's not the same as being a Christian. Mm-hmm. All right? And so I believe and I'm speaking not about anybody specifically in our church, this might apply to it, but I'm just speaking about American Christianity in general over the last couple of years. It became evident that we had a group of what I would call nominal Christians, in the sense that they were name only. I don't mean they were Christians, but they called themselves Christian. They like to think that they were Christian, but they were Christian in name only. There was no real commitment to Christ. And you can kind of see that if you just kind of look at your local church, there are people who sort of had one foot in the door and one foot out the door, you know, in their participation, in their just their enjoyment of church and church life and the things of God. They weren't quite always there. Well, what happens during the pandemic, I think, is that you lose the relationship that kind of kept you there. You know, whatever friend or relative you had that you kind of showed up for, the pandemic gave you a reason where you didn't have to show up anymore. And you had one foot out the door, you just kept walking. And some of these people went to different churches. They are Christians and went to different churches, and I would give room for that. Some of them were not Christians and were looking for a way to get out of the church, and the pandemic was a great reason to. That's how I kind of see it. Any other thoughts or questions? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to pray for us, and then I want to reset our Bible study. Father, I thank you for this time together that we can have.